Well, it was a 2-0 week for the Hall, and now they get some well-deserved time off. Their final bye week of Big East play, coming off a pair of wins over Xavier in St. John's, and you got another bubble game coming up against Butler this weekend. And to break it all down, welcome to this edition of Hoist the Colors. Pat Madden, along with your boy Tim Best, and this week, since we're so close to NCAA tournament time. First four begins in 4 weeks from tomorrow. We're going to get a bracket in just a little under a month. And your Pirates are right on the cusp and joining the show, Seton Hall alum, class of 2016. He knows his way around the net and, putting together all the vital information for all Seton Hall fans to see whether the Pirates are in or not and what more they need to do in order to get back to the NCAA tournament. It is Brian Franklin. Brian, given what you do as a service to all of us in Seton Hall Twitter, it's really good that we get you on the show here, a month before we start the tournament.
Yeah, appreciate it, fellas. Always good to be on. Great to see you again, Tim and Pat. Long time no see. You'll have to get back to Chicago for another DePaul game.
Oh, yeah. Look at the clock. Oh, look at the time. It's demon time. One of these days I'll get to Wintrust.
Yes,
but
please do.
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to go to Chicago. We were supposed to go there summer. My family and I were supposed to go summer 2020, and we all know what happened. We're going to go see Wrigley and Guaranteed Rate Field. But some of the best things in life may have to wait. But that's another story for another time. But let's just talk about Seton Hall coming into last week. Their net was 75, I believe, and going into the Xavier game, considering how Xavier looked against them in Cincinnati, I called it on the show. I'm going to pat myself on the back here. They were going to have a bounce back effort like Xavier did after getting walloped by UConn, and they won 3 straight. And then they come out against Xavier with the intensity that they lacked against Villanova. And because of an 18-point win, they jump up 8 spots in the net to 67. Brian, I'll start with you. Your evaluation on the Pirates. Dominating performance and winning by 18, even without Dre Davis for the entire second half.
Yeah, it's again, like you said, Tim, desperately needed the effort and the energy that you wanted to see coming out. Really hot start to open, and they kept their foot on the pedal. It does make you wonder, though. The lead had bubbled to the 20s at certain points in that game. If you're able to kind of keep the score in that range, how many more net spots do you get since margin of victory is so important? At the end of the day, I don't think it's that crucial. Like a double-digit win over a fellow bubble team, potential NCAA tournament team is very good and exactly what the doctor ordered following the Villanova debacle. But yeah, this is exactly what you wanted to see. The exact effort, energy, offensive ball movement, like everything was there that you wanted. And defensively, they locked in for, I think Shaw said about 35, 32 minutes of the game. I would probably agree with that.
And Pat, your assessment of, again, they were up 47-25 at the half. Quincy Olivari, he got going in the second half, but lucky enough for the Pirates, because they only held them to 4 points in the first half, that ended up playing a pivotal role in the Pirates, and they got down to 15. I'm like, come on, don't let them back in it. But for them to respond and not allow Xavier to creep their way back in, like, that's exactly what this team needed, considering the fact, again, Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday, they got crushed and blown out by Nova.
Right, and a name that we didn't mention is Dylan Adewusu. He had been given the assignment on Wednesday to stay with Quincy Olivari, and he did a remarkable job doing so. One of the things I pointed out in last week's episode was that when you're playing a player like Olivari, you're normally part of your assignment is don't help, meaning, don't go if Desmond Claude's trying to drive the lane, Wusu shouldn't back off of Olivari, because that's exactly what Xavier wants you to do. Plus, we also kept Xavier from getting transition baskets. They weren't getting rebounds and going down the court the way they've been able to do against other teams in the Big East. David McKnight, for example, is one of the quicker guards I've seen all year. but Alamir Dawes, Kadari Richmond, a combination of those guys stopped the ball. You know, you hear coaches say, stop the ball. It's one of the most basic comments you hear in all levels of basketball. But stop the ball means don't let the ball get close to the basket so that the team on a fast break gets easy points. And I think that's just something which Seton Hall was able to do. And that's why they got to the big lead and they held the big lead and got the relatively easy victory against Xavier on Wednesday night.
So my takeaways, limiting production from guys that, killed Seton Hall. The one that stuck out to me from the December 23rd matchup was Abu Usman, who was part of, Seton Hall was targeting him in the offseason. And in that first meeting, he put up a double-double and he had a really outstanding game. Here in the rematch, he barely saw the court, and Sean Miller benched him in favor of their backup big, a freshman. I know his last name is Enze, not to be mistaken with NZ. And he ended up playing the majority of the minutes and played pretty well. But the fact that we shut Usman down, and Pat, great observation talking about Adewusu's defense on Olivari, to get a bigger body on him, 6'4", 235. You're basically being guarded by a fullback, and he understood the assignment, and he did his job. Sometimes the simplest things is just go out there and just do your job, and that's exactly what Dylan Adewusu did. And I will say, for Dre Davis to, for his ankle to swell up, miss the entire second half, yeah, it sucked, but Seton Hall navigated enough to the point where they didn't let it bring them down, and they needed guys to step up. And Alamir Dawes, Pat, you've called it so many times, he's a lot better shooting from three in the Prudential Center than he is away from it. And he got his three-point shot going early and often. Kadari got into that rhythm where he could score at will, and second most assists in a Big East game in the history of Seton Hall basketball, only behind the guy who's coaching him, Shaheen Holloway. So I couldn't have been happier. I know, obviously, there's more to be had. Could have beaten them by a lot more, and you let them creep back into it in the second half. But honestly, that's kind of a moot point. And you just take it for what it's worth. You beat Xavier. You back in the win column. All right, now let's go to Long Island Sunday and take on a St. John's team that is also starving for a win. And the common thing with St. John's, and someone pointed it out, against UConn and Marquette, right? In each of the four meetings against them, St. John's led at halftime. You want to know how many games they won between those four? 0. And it's just crazy. And I think they led against Providence right before this game. And here come the Johnnies up 38-19 at half, early, late in the first half. Seton Hall gets it down to 12. And, I'm kind of glad I didn't watch the first half. I probably would have been throwing stuff at the TV. But following along, I'm like, oh, God, here we go again. But down to 12, I'm like, okay, it's manageable. And it was just enough where the defense was bad in the first 17 minutes. For them to hold St. John's over the next almost 20 minutes to 10 points or whatever it was, that's Seton Hall, baby. Brian, how much can you attest to that?
That is exactly it. We want to put you in the meat grinder, slow it down. Every single time I watch Seton Hall basketball, at some point or another, I'm yelling slow down, because too often they're trying to do too much, and that's not our brand of ball, at least not right now. Defensively, it's everything. They locked in the second half. The first half, St. John's just too many open looks and too easy at passes. Second half, we were able to be more active defensively. It looked like they were switching on almost everything, kind of playing positionless basketball outside of Bediako, which was huge. Honestly, we could have won this game by double digits. That's how insane the second half performance was. Missed 12 free throws in this game, got 3 of 15 from 3. I can picture multiple opportunities that we had that were just wide open looks that could not get cashed in the second half, and still ended up winning the game by 6 after trailing by 19. It's a quad 1 win. It goes a long way. Winning on the road is hard. Winning on the road in Power 6 basketball is even harder. To be able to do that and get multiple road conference wins over quad one opponents is absolutely enormous for not just the mentality of this team, but the resume overall.
And Pat, from the I'm assuming you must have been watching this, wherever you were, and just the
20 rows from the court.
You were in UBS.
I went out to Long Island. I don't think I'll do it again for what it's worth.
What was it, like 5 hours?
Oh my God. I mean, it was I'll tell you something I told a few people. You think about St. John's plays home games at the Garden, and they play games. The St. John's campus is in a place called Jamaica, Queens. So you catch the LIRR at Madison Square Garden, and then the second stop on the Huntington line, where the UBS arena is Jamaica. So we passed by both places where St. John's usually plays to get to the UBS arena, which, it's a nice building, but even St. John's fans don't want to play there anymore. And another point about it, which will piggyback a little bit of what Brian just said, was I chalked up some of the poor shooting to not being familiar with the building, meaning that it's something that some people are commenting differences between the Rock, which is also a hockey arena, and the UBS. The Rock, everyone's a little closer to the action. Like when you look at the background on the baskets at the Rock, the fans are pretty close to you. Whereas in the UBS arena, they feel like they're 200 feet away. So your perception as a shooter, particularly on foul shots, is going to be a little bit like Bediakov's a much better foul shooter than he showed yesterday. And he just, I forgot what he was. I think he's 70% for the year. And yesterday he goes, what did he go from the foul line yesterday? 2 for 6.
Yeah.
So that's not a typical Bediako game from the foul line. And I think a couple of other people struggled because I think it's they weren't used to shooting in that building. And that might also explain some of the poor shooting, although some of the poor shooting was also because in the first half, they just took a lot of ill-advised shots. I mean, nothing was going right until that sequence where Holloway draws the technical foul on something where he didn't think Richmond made contact with one of the St. John shooters. And then unfortunately what happens after that is not only does St. John's hit both of the foul shots, but then they hit a basket after that, which is how a 13-point lead became an 18-point lead. But then what's key is that in those last 3 minutes of the second half, Seton Hall goes on a 10-3 run, which makes it more manageable in the second half. To make an analogy to, let's say, Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick loved getting the ball at the end of the half when he deferred the kick, because he knew he would get 2 possessions. He'd get the last possession in the first half and the first possession in the second half. So I think that the dynamic about both of the games with St. John's, if we remember the game up in Newark a month ago, was that we made the big run going into the half, and then we make the big run coming out of the half. So that almost as similar, it wasn't 28-0 like the game up in Newark a month ago, but it was still 10-3 going to the locker room. And then I believe the run after the half when we took the lead was something like 18-4.
So it was 24-4.
Well, was it that? I mean, so the run, if you put the runs together, it's something like 24 to. It was like a 20. Oh, it was ridiculous. I mean, you're talking.
I think it was 24-4. Like I remember seeing, like, who's better, Masiello, Patino?
That's right, because
versus 28-0. Like you really think that's not much of an improvement? No.
Right, but I mean, the idea here is that we made big runs off them at the end and the beginning of the first and the beginning of the second, and St. John's hit a couple of shots after we took the lead, and I think they led it 54-53. But you could tell that whatever they did in the first half was not working. Like, for example, R.J. Luis, who was Darius Jenkins was red hot in the first half and couldn't get his shot up. Joel Soriano scored 11 points in the first 10 minutes and didn't get more points until he had a garbage time layup of about 30 seconds to go. So, at that point, the zone stretched, the man-to-man stretched out a little bit. They covered the arc a lot better. They kept St. John's out of the paint where they were killing us in the first half. Again, a credit to Richmond, a credit to Wusu. a credit to Alamir Dawes. The hands are working better, and we're taking advantage of bad passes and bad shot selection by St. John's in the second half.
I will say also, I didn't really expect Dre Davis to play a lot. I mean, it didn't surprise me, like, oh, he's coming off the bench. Okay, cool. And then he plays 34 minutes off the bench and plays exceptionally well, given the fact that his ankle was so swollen, didn't even practice in the lead up to this game. And for him to play at that level, that just shows how much of a dog Double D, super producer Dr. Dre Davis was in this game. Without his performance, he didn't stuff the stat sheet like a Kadari Richmond, like Jaden Bediako, who, had his way in the second half when Soriano was struggling and also getting to the line, drawing a lot of fouls because, as Rick Pitino himself said, they're too slow and that's why they're fouling so much. We got to address that eventually, but just to keep the focus on the Pirates, once Alamir Dawes, once he he got a 3-pointer to fall. I think they got it to 4. And it was very similar to the 3 he hit up in Providence, where it was a 1-point game. He gets a look, a really good one at that. I think he just a complete miscommunication on a switch, left wide open right around the top of the key. And he does what Alamir Dawes does. He buries it. And that buried St. John's' hopes. And I was just, given all the smack that St. John's was talking in the offseason, getting Pitino and all these big name transfers, Jenkins and Dingle, and getting Soriano back and Ledlum, it was just so satisfying. It was like, I'm like, Cartman licking up the tears of sadness, even though that's way more messed up for the context of it, but I digress. It just felt so satisfying after all that smack talk. Not only to win that game, but everything Rick said after the game. So before we even get to it, I want to get your thoughts on it. Brian, you're our guest. I'll defer to you first.
Yeah, I was saying to a couple people that I'm a Big East fan. Like, I cheer for every Big East school when they are not playing Seton Hall. I want to see the other programs do well. And there were points last year where I genuinely felt bad for St. John's. Like, this is an absolute dumpster fire. It's a mess. Mike Anderson doesn't care. The team doesn't care. This is horrible. And then they hire Rick Pitino and act like it's over, like they've won every single thing. And then all of a sudden decide to come at Seton Hall for them hiring a coach. And so at that point, it just became, I can't wait until we actually play games, because you don't win anything in April or May post NCAA tournament. No games are played until October again. So let's maybe wait with the trash talk. But yeah, to hear Rick say that stuff was, I would say, pretty discouraging overall. Like, it's just a bad look for him, for St. John's, for the Big East. There's such a spotlight on him being in New York with all this going on. This is essentially a hand-picked roster for however much he wants to say we didn't have that much time to recruit and do everything. He went out and got guys. He was put in place fairly early. They had a full offseason to go recruit, and he could have come out and said it's very hard to win in college basketball with a bunch of transfers because my system or my player progression takes time. Like, I need years with you in order to build something, not these guys stink, they're slow. There's a reason we're losing all these games is because no one can defend without fouling, things like that, and naming players by name. Just go out and take some sort of accountability for what's happened, because it's not all on the players. Like, yeah, there's certainly a bit to it, and they would kind of pan over to the bench as certain guys were coming out post mistakes or whatever's happening. And you almost see like a dejected look immediately. And then Rick starts talking and it kind of is a glaze over, because you just don't want to hear what he has to say, because it's probably so negative. Like, if he's talking this negatively about his team in public to the press, imagine what it is behind closed doors. So it is a nightmare right now for St. John's. That said, they're an extremely talented team. There's a reason a lot of people thought they would do well, and it's because the amount of talent that they have on the roster. I wouldn't say all is lost, but after losing a game like this to the quote unquote poverty school that you should be beating, even though you haven't really beaten them in years, I don't know where you go. You got to look in the mirror, and the guys either have to play for each other or give up on the year completely.
Pat?
Well, I mean, the one guy who is the poster child of all this is Joel Soriano, who Pitino goes in March and says, he is the rock of which I'm building my roster around. I think he's an all Big East performer. He's obviously the double machine. He's someone who can, I guess in theory, Pitino thought he could dominate games because he plays so well. And now we're in the middle of February, and he benches Soriano before the Providence game because he's lost, because it's a combination of Soriano losing some confidence in his own game, but Pitino losing confidence in Soriano. And then even last night, you could just, I hate to say it, watching the game close up, Soriano looked like a zombie most of that second half. I mean, if like, there is no way some of the guys we mentioned on our team, the Dre Davises, the Kadari Richmonds, the Alamir Dawses would go down without a fight in a game. I mean, maybe they did against Villanova, but most of the time, these guys aren't going to sit back and see a 20-point lead slip away and not do something about it. And Soriano sitting there like, which way, and he gets the ball. He got the ball in good position a couple of times in the second half, and he could have shot it over Bediako. And for some reason, he just didn't have the confidence or didn't have the want to put a shot up and take over. I mean, there were St. John's fans yelling, go at the basket, go at the basket. The worst you're going to get is you're going to get fouled. And for some reason, they just, except for RJ Lewis, they weren't doing that. So, again, it's sort of weird when you bring in these guys who don't really have an attachment to the situation. I mean, it was funny. Jerry Carino did an article on Friday where he interviewed Sarah Kustok, who was doing the color commentary for the game. And Kustok makes the comment about Seton Hall that the reason why Seton Hall's doing so well is continuity. Davis, Dawes, Richmond, they've all played together for 2 years now. So these guys are a team. As opposed to St. John's, you bring Ledlum and Dingle and Jenkins and Lewis, and these guys are just these guys don't know how each other's going to play. And, maybe I hate to say it, they don't have each other's backs. So you could tell the contrast between a team that's old and getting older and experienced playing together and a team that might be more talented, but just doesn't have the chemistry.
That's, again, someone pointed it out that, in terms of building, great rosters, it takes more than just a year for them to really gel and maximize their potential. Great point that was made. Look at Texas a couple of years ago. They brought in a ton of talent. They brought in Marcus Carr from Minnesota, familiar to us, Christian Bishop from Creighton, and they had all this talent, but they were good, but they weren't great. They were a 6 seed that year and got bounced in the second round. And then the year after that, they win the Big 12 tournament. They're a 2 seed. They were so good, I ended up picking them to win the whole thing last year. And still, they got to that point. Like, that's the Texas team that everyone was expecting the year prior. In a way, like St. John's, like maybe they'll become that team, next year if Rick doesn't run them out of town, which I wouldn't be shocked if he does. Like, and someone made a great point. If you're, the mother of a player and their son wants to transfer to St. John's potentially, and you see the kind of disparaging things that Rick says, as a mother or as a parent, do you really want to have your son be under his guidance when he's going to throw you under the bus like that? Like,
that was
no.
That was your buddy Andrew Goldstein, I think.
Oh, my boy Slice. Yeah. Yes. Know him for broadcasting camp way back in the day. Shout out to you, Slice, if you're watching this. But yeah, the answer is clearly no. And I don't care how much of a legend you are for Rick Pitino. You just don't do that. Like, that's just deplorable. And to think of the antithesis with Shaheen Holloway on the other sideline. On Wednesday after they beat Xavier, I remember him saying, if you thought that we were gonna have the same kind of effort and mentality 3 days after we got beat like that. I wasn't going to let that happen. That was number one. Number two, seeing the body language after EHE got an offensive rebound and drew a foul, seeing how fired up he was and lifting his guys up and believing in them. That is what separates, this generation of coaches and why they end up being more successful. And that's why you see, more younger coaches like a Dan Hurley, like I'm trying to think of it, like Eric Spoelstra, for example, in the NBA. He was pretty young, with LeBron and D Wade and Bosh, but then as he got older, he's still relatively young, but he still won. And Kim English, yeah, I mean that's even better example. Thank you, Pat. He's getting a lot out of his guys. Granted that the preseason coaches poll was stupid. Essentially it's H like milk, aka Georgetown in 8th, but I digress. But the younger coaches, the coaches that players can relate to more, you get more out of your players, and also the continuity obviously helps too. So for them to be in this position with 5 games left in conference play, 10-5, bare minimum 500 again in conference, which I don't think we've been under 500 in conference since 2014-15. We're talking under 500. Like, it's been almost a full decade. That's sure we've missed the tournament a few times, but the fact that this team hasn't gone under 500 in conference since Isaiah Whitehead, Angel Delgado, that recruiting class since their freshman year, it's a testament to Seton Hall having sustained success. Now the question is, from here on out, in terms of the net and all that and the resume, Brian, what's going to be the key to sustained success and what the ideal record should be the rest of the way to hit a certain magic number or to do enough to be solidly in the tournament and hear their name called Selection Sunday?
Look, if you want to guarantee lockdown an NCAA tournament bid right now, go win one of your road games. Go beat UConn on the road. Go beat Creighton on the road. That is a surefire lock for the NCAA tournament in that scenario. Given that Creighton is our house of horrors, I cannot remember the last time we won there. Maybe a Sterling Gibbs late jumper won that game, but outside of that, it's a very tough place to play. Always a great crowd, and Creighton is just usually a bad matchup for us. UConn obviously playing the best basketball of anyone right now. So while I am optimistic overall, it seems unlikely that either of those will give you the rewards that you're looking for. The rest of the way, win your home games and you're a lock. That's what I see. Win your home games, you are locked for the NCAA tournament. That's 2 more quad 2 wins and then a win over DePaul. If you can do so again in style like they did in Chicago, that will dramatically help the metrics. I think if you win those 3 games, you're probably sitting around 60 or sub 60 in the net, and that is enough to get yourself a solid 10 seed or even an 11, which this team would be a very dangerous 10 or 11 seed in the NCAA tournament. I think the most important part, you can't lose to DePaul, first and foremost. If you're going to lose to the bigger teams, don't get blown out. Try and keep it as close as possible. And 3, don't leave anything for the Big East tournament because we've already seen how little the committee values the conference tournaments. Outside of winning it, there's really not much you can do to help yourself. So win your home games, I think is the message right now. You've got a Butler team that you've already beat on the road. They are playing some decent basketball, a bit up and down, but they are a team that can surprise you, can get hot. Villanova is going to be an outrageous game just because of what had happened already this season and the fact that they are the boogeyman. We cannot seem to get past them. And then it all comes down to a game against DePaul to close the season. When has that ever gone wrong for us?
Oh God. We're talking like 2015, 2019 vibes. The game where we got our rebounded, like, was it 52-25 or something like that? Oh my God.
Yep.
PTSD from that.
But just to fill in a gap there that Brian left out, the last time we beat Creighton in Omaha was 2019.
Perfect.
I believe Zagorowski was a freshman that year. Marcus Zagorowski was a freshman. Mm-hmm. That was the team that still had Alexander, the old Al. I forgot what the old Alexander's name was.
Tyshawn
Alexander, Mitch Ballack. Those were those guys the year before they claimed the share of the Big East championship. So
Right.
their first year playing together, and they had a lead against. They were up, I think, as many as 8 or 10 in the second half, and then Miles Powell and Sandru Mamukelashvili chipped away, and Creighton could have hit a shot in the last 5 minutes, and we ended up beating them by 6 out in Omaha. I also think the other factor going into the Creighton game, and we'll talk probably more about this next week, is the revenge factor. I mean, that Seton Hall's going to be pissed off about what happened at the Rock about a month ago, losing that triple overtime game, and how much went into every play that had to be made, every play that didn't get made, and so on and so forth. So I think they're going to be extra motivated to maybe pick Creighton off out in Omaha. The Villanova game scares me only because Villanova is just weird. There's some weird mojo. No matter how good or bad Villanova is, it just seems like they're always a very difficult team to beat, regardless of the circumstances. And as we saw last week out in Philadelphia, they are playing their best basketball of the season now. And they also, miracle of miracles, have at-large hopes. If they can manage to find a way to win enough games down the stretch, Villanova has aspirations of, as weird as you talk about this, with a team that's got 11 losses on President's Day. If they manage to find the right wins down the stretch, I think they have a game left with Georgetown.
Yeah,
if I'm not
do.
mistaken. They have a game left with Georgetown. I think let me look at Villanova's schedule just quickly.
I think I got it. So they got Butler at home tomorrow, at UConn, home against Georgetown, at Providence, at Seton Hall, and then they close with Creighton at home.
I mean, if they win the 2 games they're supposed to win the rest of this month, which is Creighton and Butler tomorrow, and then they can. I mean, they probably look at the 3 games that they have in March, and they probably think, because they've already beaten us, and they've beaten all 3 of those teams: Providence, Seton Hall, and Creighton. They're thinking they could get 5-1 the rest of the Big East, which puts them at 19, and they're not being left out at 19-12. Because they have all those nice wins that they got over in Atlantis, and they have the road win against Creighton, and they would tack on a couple of quad 1 wins, beating us in Providence. So guys like Justin Moore and guys like Eric Dixon have been through the ringers of playing tough March games before. So I would hate to say if you either need the Creighton game or the Villanova game, even if it's out in Omaha, that Creighton game might be just a little easier to get than beating big bad Villanova. But time will tell. Let's get to Saturday first. Let's beat a Butler team who is very beatable right now. Butler looked awful in the second half against Creighton on Saturday afternoon. It looks like they don't really play a lot of defense. Their defense didn't really show up in the second half against Creighton, and some of their big name scorers like Telford and Davis and Brooks look to be in a little bit. They didn't play very well against Marquette. They didn't play well against Creighton at all. So you're getting Butler, and who knows what Butler's going to be like after they play Villanova tomorrow night. But, you're getting a Butler team who's starting to get a little bit down on themselves. And this is the type of team you can't treat them. Sometimes a wounded animal is the most dangerous one. So you got to make sure that you take care of business against a Butler team you've already beaten out in Hinkle Fieldhouse in the beginning of January.
Yeah, and the thing is, again, coming off a bye, Seton Hall has had Butler's number over the last, let's just say, probably since 2019-20, Seton Hall has had their number. Actually, no, the regular season, probably go back all the way to, Senior Day in 2017 at Hinkle, when Seton Hall won that game with Miles Powell hitting the clutch 3 to bury them and get themselves into the tournament. Seton Hall's kind of owned them in the regular season. And in Newark, they haven't lost there since 2016-17, my junior year. The team that went to the Sweet 16, mind you. Yeah, and you know what? Butler is one of those teams, you talk about, it's a good point. A wounded animal can sometimes be the most dangerous. well, in some cases, unlike the poor deer that I saw on Twitter who tried jumping a fence when the door was wide open and ended up paralyzing itself and snapping its legs. I don't think that deer would be dangerous, which maybe that's what Butler's doing right now because they look great against Marquette and Creighton in the first half, and then they just crashed and burned. Who knows what's going to happen at the Finn Tuesday night? But in terms of Brian, dare I say this might be a bubble elimination game on Saturday night?
Yeah, it very well could be. Like a loss here, especially by double digits, would do bad things to the net overall for both of these teams. Seton Hall, it's a quad 2 game, so it's certainly more dangerous at home. You don't want to fall to 2-3 in the quad 2 games because while that's respectable, still it doesn't hide the blemishes of 2-2 in quad 3 games as well. 5 quad 1 wins is great. It is tops in the country nearly. There are 14 other teams, I believe, with 5 or more quad 1 wins. You can't add anything too negative. You need, if you're going to lose games, you got to lose to the upper echelon, the quad 1 games, and do your dirty work at home.
I want to ask you a question, Brian. I thought about this analogy because obviously Seton Hall this morning was a very hot topic on Twitter about the debate between a team that wins big games and a team that has poor performance metrics. I know you and Brian Fox, your podcast, you do college football in the fall and you do college basketball in the spring. So you were hot and heavy in the middle of the whole Florida State versus Alabama controversy with the NCAA tournament, with the playoff, and about how Florida State wins all of their games, but because Florida State didn't look good, particularly when their quarterback got hurt, that was the reason the selection committee for the football playoff gave for leaving Florida State out and putting Alabama in. So are there parallels when you look at a team like Seton Hall about having a really good resume in terms of the quad 1 wins, but the poor performance metrics?
To an extent, yeah. Like I think college football, at least in the 4-team playoff era, is kind of we're kind of just playing the games because we have to for the most part. And Herb Street has said as much in the selection show. It's like, we need the 4 best teams by the eye test. These are the 4 best teams. So like, that's what we're going with. And that's what should be, that's the group that should be selected. College basketball, we're very fortunate in that it's a 68-team tournament. We have figured out that you don't have to just limit it to very small groups. We can expand this, let mid-majors, let small majors in, and give seemingly everyone an opportunity, unless, of course, you're transitioning to D1, which is a whole nother topic that I will not get into. But to an extent, yeah, like I think the eye test does matter. You look at this Seton Hall team and you look at USC, for example. Early in the season, USC won that game. It was tight for a bit, and then they pulled away. They were looking like a top 25 team. You look at the resume now when they show the graphic on Fox or CBS, and it says, bad loss, number 23 USC, because that's how dramatically different they are playing right now. At the same time, you're looking at the Seton Hall team and thinking, they just did not play well in the non-conference for whatever reason. It just was not clicking. Now, all of a sudden, they're playing some of their best basketball to the point in which they are the only team in the Big East to beat the number 1 team in the country, the consensus number 1 team in the country.
Unanimous.
I think you have to an extent, you do look at that and say, okay, this is where we're at right now. Like, we are peaking at this time. It would not be the first team ever to get that benefit. It would not be the first team to say, okay, you are light years different from your non-conference. I think the thing that kills is the fact that in the non-conference, you really had one opportunity for a win and you looked horrible at Baylor. Like, that was the opportunity that you needed to take advantage of. Iowa is coming to life a little bit. They just beat a bad Wisconsin team, and that metrically will help them a ton. Baylor was your chance. Like, that was it. You can't really imagine that Missouri is going to go winless in the SEC early on in the season. You don't imagine that USC is obviously going to fall off a cliff. You don't imagine that. I mean, Rutgers was always going to be around the bubble. You don't imagine that they're just going to struggle for most of December and January after they win that game. So, like, you are a victim almost to other teams playing than you are yourself.
But as you pointed out, as you pointed out a little bit earlier, take care of your business. Don't just sit there and say, all right, you know what, maybe, which I think is part of the it's part of the mentality that a school like that fans of St. John's have, which is, hey, look, St. John's has been talking before that game yesterday of, look, we have this great record. We're 42 in the net. We've beaten Utah. We've beaten, I forgot who they beat in the Big East. That was Villanova. We've beaten Villanova twice. We've beaten Utah. So look at our record. But then you realize you guys have won 2 games since the middle of January. And this is you've played 8 or 9 games. You've gone 2-7 in your last 9. So, unfortunately, part of it is that you have to have wins. I mean, Xavier's got a good resume, but Xavier's 13-12. They don't have wins. So, and one other thing I just want to leave in the talk about bracketology and make sure this point is made. Human beings select the tournament field, not the net, not Joe Lenardi's not in the selection committee, nor is any other nor is any of the big bracketologists you see out there. None of them are. The selection committee is made up of athletic directors and a couple of school presidents of, they pick conferences, but these are the people select this committee, and people who might think differently than the bracketologists you're seeing online. So that, look, if they look at Seton Hall, one of the points you just made, Brian, is if they want to give Seton Hall, somebody in that committee might want to give Seton Hall the benefit of the doubt because they are one of 2 teams that beat Connecticut this season, and give them credit and say, hey, look, if you can beat Connecticut, you can beat anybody in the field.
Yeah, I kind of look at it as like Northwestern struggling right now. They lost Ty Berry, who's one of their best players, and they have a win over Purdue again, but they also lost to Chicago State. Like, Seton Hall doesn't have that glaringly horrible loss on their resume. If you're going to say USC or Rutgers is the worst loss, like, okay, we'll live with that at the end of the day. But you've got those great wins. So you're showing the capability of doing it. And just for the Lenardi point, like I do not take anything that guy says seriously. He's the father of bracketology. Sure, we appreciate what he did. If you use Bracket Matrix, which I do religiously, he is the 98th ranked bracketologist out of like 174. He's not even top 50% in something he invented. So I don't take him very seriously. And anytime I see him with Seton Hall at a different level than I believe they're at, I kind of look for the overall consensus to kind of see where the top guys have them, but 2, where the general public, or at least the bracketology community, has them.
So something I do want to mention, in terms of, Villanova's net, I feel like because of the wins that they have, UNC, Texas Tech, at Creighton, we'll ignore the fact that they lost 3 games in the Big 5 and they finished 6th in the Big 5, which is just a black eye that is very hard to shake. But for Villanova, and we talked about their remaining schedule, right? If you, let's just say out of the next 4 games that they play, let's just say they win 3 of them with the only loss coming at UConn, because I can see them winning at Providence. They'll beat Butler at home. I will be mortified if they lose to Georgetown. But let's just say they win 3 of the next 4. They're 10-8 in conference, 17-12 on the season. And depending on the quality of those wins, like let's just say, they blow Georgetown out, they beat Butler by double digits, they kind of hang tough against UConn, and then they get a quad 1 win. I would be shocked if it's not a quad 1 win at that point at Providence. Is there any chance that if they beat Villanova, Seton Hall does at home, you think that could become a quad 1 win?
I think it would take a lot at this stage of the season, because one of the things you're starting to notice is that, now that you've got 25, you're going to get to 30 games into your body of work. By the time you get to that point, the needle doesn't move as much when you win now, as opposed to if you win a game which it really shouldn't matter, because the only time that your net truly matters at the end of the day is on what would be the middle of March 14th, when the committee comes into the room and starts putting names on the big bracket. March 14th is when anything really matters. So if you think about it, you look at it and you say, well, could Rutgers net get to 75 and make that a quad 2 loss? Could Providence, whatever it is, the point being is that those net numbers, they move during the season, but it matters when they get what they are on March the 14th, when the committee gets a sheet saying, here's what the net of all of the at-large contenders are. And then they start saying, well, this net's good, this net's bad, and we need to look further into a team like Seton Hall, for example. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, their net is 60 on March the 14th. Then they'll look deeper into what's on the resume. Then those quad 1 wins pop up, and then, we'll see where USC and Rutgers are at that point to see whether those are bad enough losses. And then they'll look at some of the performance metrics. They'll look at that margin of victory that we talked about, and we'll see how much losing that game at Villanova the 26 is. We'll see how bad the loss to Xavier by 20 is. And then we'll sort of see how that factors into the equation.
Yeah, I think that, Tim, to your point, like it is possible that they move up into the top 30 of the net. The problem is, if you win that game, you probably knock them out of the top 30. So it's the double-edged sword, right? Like you have the opportunity at hand, but then you winning that game pushes them back out. So I agree with what Pat said. But yeah, overall, like that is the prize game. You can win that one at home and do so well. Like you've got another really quality win that, again, offsets some of that non-conference issue.
Yeah, Selection Sunday, like I love it. I love this Selection Sunday. I love it most every year. I dread it sometimes though, because if Seton Hall's in, you fear the worst, like I did my senior year. I remember thinking to myself, when they went to the Midwest region, they had Kansas. I'm like, oh no, we're going to come up here. And then I see 8, I'm like, no. And it's just, now it's more of the fear this time around of, like, depending on what happens, like if we get a bye in the first round for the Big East Tournament, we get that 4 seed, it's a matter of, okay, we got the 4 seed, that should get us in. But if we get to the semis, we're safe, but it's a matter of, in the eyes of the committee, and I hate the fact that it's out of my hands and I can't say or speak to it, but because I don't know what they're thinking. Do they think we're better than what I think they are? Do they think they're worse than what I think they are? Are they going to bump us to a 9? Are they going to make us go to Dayton? Like, that's what I love Selection Sunday, but that's the one part I dread and hate about it. But overall, Brian, I'll put this up to you. Like, what's going to take, in terms of number of wins, or maybe even, number with Big East tournament wins being factored in, what do you think it'll take for the Pirates to avoid the first 4?
I mean, like we said, if you can steal one of those games against Creighton or UConn, that'll keep you well away from there. I think you bump up to probably a 10 seed is probably our ceiling at this point. I mean, and that's where you want to be. You certainly do not want to be in that 8-9 game with this team. But I think 19 wins should get you to Dayton. That's 2 wins in these final games. If you are to drop to, say, Villanova and UConn Creighton, it's a 3-game losing streak, which isn't great, but I imagine wins over Butler and DePaul should be enough. 19-12 feels good. It gets you to what, 12-8 in Big East play. I personally find it hard to believe that they would leave a 12-8 Big East team out of the NCAA tournament that has beaten UConn and Marquette. That said, they will probably put a couple extra Big Ten teams that don't belong in the field. The golden number is 20. Get to 20 wins, and I think you're in. At that point, doesn't matter where you are. Just get to 20 wins, and you can celebrate the fact that you're in the NCAA tournament.
So, Brian, since I have you, because I know, you're class of 16, you were there my first couple of years at the Hall. Because I will always find a way to talk about it. I want to take a trip down memory lane and talk about your senior year, particularly at the Hall, in terms of, us getting into the tournament, but the saga of, the slow build, and then as we get to February and then to March, getting into the tournament. I mean, take me down memory lane. Tell me what you remember just from because the year before in February, the team crumbled and almost got Kevin Willard fired. But February into March was the polar opposite. I mean, what do you remember from, February and March of 2016? What are your fondest memories from Seton Hall? Not only, getting to the tournament, but winning the Big East tournament title and also not having to worry about sweating it out on Selection Sunday.
Yeah. Probably the Xavier game stands out the most. It was a home game. We were dealing with a lot of injuries at that point, but it was a game that you really felt would turn the tide. They were playing so well after a poor start in Big East play. And they picked that one up to move to 21-7, 11-5 in the Big East. And it was number 5 Xavier. Like it was a big deal at the time. And it was a team that we would see very soon after in another great game. But it just felt like there was optimism and there was the opportunity that something could be afoot. I don't know that anyone anticipated a Big East tournament championship. I think the idea was let's get to the NCAA tournament and maybe win a game, and that would be awesome because like you and I talked about pre-show, like my freshman year, you never could have dreamed of that. They were bad. They were not looking anything better. We were grabbing everyone we could from Europe that didn't get offers from bigger schools. And it was certainly a struggle, but then, you go on this run in late January through February. It starts with St. John's. You win 8 of 9 and 10 of 12 to close the season. You get hot at the right time, and then peak throughout the Big East tournament in that dreaded 9:30 game. But still, that's where the fireworks happen against Creighton. Then they beat Xavier, and then had to be at the game for Villanova, and that was one of the most insane experiences I have as a Seton Hall fan. Just being in the building, us going up big, losing the lead, the crowd coming back to life, and then the Whitehead hangs and one. It will ring forever.
That soundbite will live rent free in my head, and same with the GIF of Willard collapsing to the ground. And pointed out by Grant Billmeyer, like he had no idea Willard had collapsed onto him until like he literally felt his weight like at his feet. He's like, Kevin, what are you doing there? But yeah, man, it just, I mean, that was 8 years ago. And it feels like ages ago, but the fact that we have to keep this in perspective, what happened in 2016, if that doesn't happen, I don't think we are where we are now. So it's just something to keep in perspective for all Seton Hall fans. So I guess that, to wrap this all up, Pat, I'll start with you this time. Now that we're here, this is the home stretch. You got to finish strong. Let's just round this out with what are the keys to this Butler game? Things they got to improve on from the first time they met in Indianapolis. Things they got to continue doing well from this past week, and obviously the first time meeting at Butler. What's it going to take for Seton Hall to win this game, and win by enough of a comfortable margin where that net number continues to decrease and the quality of that net ranking continues to improve?
It's all about playing defense. It's all about stop. We know that Brooks, Telford, Alexander, Davis, we all know what, even Finley Bizyak, we all know that they have a bunch of guys who can go off and put up 10 points in a 5-minute stretch. You get the ball gets in the right hand, the ball goes in the basket, so on and so forth. So it's the key here is just to make sure that everyone's got their defensive assignments on lock, as they did in the second half of that game out in Indianapolis. And then you got to just do the basic fundamental things, make sure you hit your foul shots. Make sure that, make sure that your offense is functioning, in a proper way. You're not taking bad shots. And then Butler's going to try to run a little bit against Seton Hall. So I think there's a lot of parallels between how you play Butler and how you played Xavier last Wednesday night. You just got to basically, the game plan's probably not a lot different because, Xavier, like Butler, had a bunch of weapons who you had to keep an eye out for. And then, of course, Bediako and Everett have to do their damage on the inside because, no, I guess this is kind of disrespecting Pierre Thomas and Andre Screen. They're solid players, but their defensive capabilities are not on the level of a Ryan Kalkbrenner or an OC Iguodaro. So at that stage, make sure you establish the inside, because that's one place Seton Hall probably has an advantage of over Butler going into Saturday night.
Brian?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Pat said. The identity of this team is on the defensive end. You have to feed off of that, get easy buckets in transition. I mean, one of the reasons they came back in this game was points off turnovers against St. John's. They were active defensively and were able to get easier buckets. I think the biggest thing is offensively, stop settling for jump shots. Keep getting in the lane, attack the basket, make the officials call fouls. If you're not getting the call or the contact, go up strong either way. Try and force their hand. And that'll open up shooting lanes. Like if Dylan Adewusu shoots 5 more threes in this game, I'm going to be very upset, just because when he got to the rim against St. John's, he was incredibly effective. When he stopped to pull up from 3, he was ineffective. I don't know the last time the guys hit a 3, but it's been a little bit. Kadari needs to continue to do what he does, get in the lane and attack. And then if we can get Dre Davis healthy over the next couple of days here, that would be ideal, because when he is healthy and at his best, he is very good.
So, yeah, I think a couple points to hammer home. Number one, I'm still marveling at the fact that, for a great offensive team like Xavier, we've turned them over 10 times in the first half. And Xavier, in terms of getting out in transition, I think they had like either 0 or 1 transition point in the first half of that game, which is like, I mean, how often does that happen to a Sean Miller-led team? It really doesn't happen often. It didn't happen his first stint at Xavier. It didn't happen at Arizona. And it hasn't happened even in his second run with Xavier, even with a team that obviously is nowhere near the level they were at last year when they went to the Sweet 16. But they gotta put the clamps down. Like, that's their bread and butter. They can't let Butler dictate the tempo, because that's when, if Seton Hall is controlling of the tempo and they're playing the cards that they want to play rather than playing the game that the other team wants to play, that's when they are at their best. And the thing is, great point about Dylan Adewusu. Like, you got to play to your strengths. Dylan Adewusu's strength is taking all 6'4", 235 of him and going to the bucket and daring whatever guard he's got on him to stop him. Chances are you're probably not. And then Alamir Dawes, especially in a home game, you got to open up some space for him to hit threes. He may have to run a set or two for him to come off curl, or just set a ball screen for him. Hope there's a miscommunication and drains a wide open 3. And for Kadari, he's got to continue being that Swiss Army knife and doing anything and everything to carve up a defense. I mean, look at what he did against Butler, and grown man buckets that ended up putting Seton Hall over the top. So I think the big thing is, take advantage of Butler and their struggles, because I don't see them winning at the Finn Tuesday night. So they'll be limping into this game on a 3-game losing streak. Take advantage of their vulnerability, make it a 4th straight loss for them, and make it a 3rd straight W for the Hall. And, I will out myself. I run no contact shoe. I tweeted, the video of, the great LA Knight, when Eli Drake at the time, but, never count out the Pirates. That's just a fact of life. Yeah. And, again, and trust in Shaw's plan. The fact that just imagine how great he would be and how great our team would be if we had even more NIL resources. Like, that is like a dream right now, but considering what we have, I cannot be happier with what Shaw is doing with this group and the continuity. I thought it would help more than a lot of people were giving off, but it's been even better, like light years better than I was anticipating. So just hope the continuity pays off. And my PSA, and as a Bluebeard Army former president, fans, I know it's a Saturday night. Students, I know you got a pregame for your Saturday night frat basement parties. Who do you know here, bro? You got 5s, as Kadeen would mock the frat bros. I miss Dino, sidetracking there. But, instead of pre-gaming in your dorm rooms or whatever, pregame at the Rock, get a pirate plank walk, and just go nuts. Slam some $5 glizzies at the Rock. Like, enjoy it and show out. And it's funny how the Devils will play earlier in the day, and then you got Seton Hall at night in the main event. Again, fans, you got to show out a hell of a lot better than you did against Xavier. I don't agree with Seton Hall Twitter's account calling them out like that, like they did, but understood the sentiment. Didn't really go well in terms of conveying that, but again, pack the Rock, just and bring the energy Saturday night, because these are the games where we need the quality and quantity in terms of crowd the most. Whew,
Just before we leave, I want to give a quick plug to the beef. What's it? Beef Fox and Beef Frank, or Beef Frank and Beef Fox?
Doesn't matter which way you do it.
Okay,
we share the same name, so it's all good.
Since you're the guy here, check out the Beef Frank and Beef Fox podcast, particularly now, if you want to get a view of the national landscape of college basketball, because the two Bryans talk about everybody. And I'm sure they'll have conversations about some of those bubble teams who we're fighting for from other parts of the basketball landscapes, schools such as some of those Big 12 schools. I don't know if Iowa State, but maybe Texas Tech, BYU. It's sort of there's I think myself that the Big 12 is the new Big 10 in college basketball, where you have a bunch of these teams that are 500 or below in the conference, but because they have these great net numbers and because they have these tremendous records, all of these teams. I saw a bracketologist who had 10 Big 12 teams in the field. I think that's absurd, but if you want to know more about that stuff, the two Beef Frank and Beef Fox are doing those episodes and, talking about all of these games that have bubble implications from other parts of the country. So focus on the teams that are on the bubble right now, as opposed to focusing on USC and Rutgers, because that's where the real action is, as far as I'm concerned.
I appreciate the plug, Pat. Very, very generous of you. And yeah, that's a perfect point. Win our games. And if you want to focus on anything, forget about USC, forget about Rutgers, forget about Iowa. Focus on the other teams around us. Focus on the teams in the last four out, the last four in, last four buys. Those are the teams that directly impact what is going on. A team like Florida or Mississippi State, who avoided a bad loss this weekend against Arkansas, is far more impactful than Rutgers losing to Minnesota last night. Like, that game doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Mississippi State not losing to Arkansas does. So again, appreciate the plug. I appreciate you both having me on. Always a pleasure to talk Hall hoops, and thank you both.
So that is going to do it for this week's episode of Hoist the Colors. For Brian Franklin and Pat Madden, I'm Tim Best signing off. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, onward to Tonia.